The artificial lights of Nexus Prime Space Station's Elite Combat Training Center cast harsh shadows across the training mats. Holographic targets flickered in and out of existence along the perimeter of the room. Their orange glow a stark contrast to the sterile white of the walls. The air smelled of antiseptic and sweat, a peculiar combination that had become the signature scent of dedication in this place. 15-year-old Leo stood at attention, his slight frame almost lost among the 20 other cadets. Despite his small stature, there was something undeniably determined in his stance. Shoulders squared, chin lifted just enough to convey respect without submission. His dark hair was cropped close to regulation, and his training uniform bore the faded insignia of a third-year cadet. "Again!" barked Trainer Zornak, his four-fingered hand gesturing sharply toward the holographic sequence. The alien's scaled skin glistened under the lights, the natural armor of his species complemented by the crisp lines of his official training uniform. "Your form is sloppy, and your reaction time would get you killed in actual combat." The cadets moved in unison, their bodies flowing through the complex series of defensive maneuvers, all except Leo, who hesitated for a fraction of a second before completing the sequence. It was enough to draw Zornak's attention. "Cadet 437, you're disrupting the unit cohesion." The trainer strode toward Leo, towering over him by at least 2 feet. "Explain your incompetence." Leo swallowed hard but met the alien's gaze. "I was adjusting my stance, sir. My grandfather taught me that proper foundation prevents injury during—" "Your grandfather?" Zornak's voice dropped to a dangerous level. The entire class froze, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "And who might your grandfather be, to override my instruction?" A moment of tension stretched between them. Leo could feel the eyes of his fellow cadets boring into him. Most were children of military officers or wealthy merchants who had purchased their way into the prestigious training program. None had ever seen anyone challenge Zornak's methods, even indirectly. "Marcus Valerian, sir." Pride crept into Leo's voice despite his attempt to maintain a neutral tone. He trained the Emperor's Guard during the Orion campaign. A ripple of whispers broke out among the cadets. The Emperor's Guard was legendary, an elite force of warriors whose skill and loyalty had preserved the peace of the Galactic Alliance for generations. To claim relation to one of their trainers was either the height of arrogance or an impressive lineage. Zornak's face contorted into what passed for a smile in his species, a bearing of jagged teeth that never reached his amber eyes. "The Emperor's Guard," he repeated, voice dripping with mockery. "Your grandfather, a trainer of the most elite fighting force in the galaxy." He circled Leo slowly. "And yet here you are, barely able to complete a basic defensive sequence." Leo's jaw tightened. "Sir, The slap came without warning. An open-handed strike that caught Leo across the face with enough force to knock him off balance. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent training room like a gunshot. "Liars have no place in my training center." Zornak snarled. "The Emperor's Guard trainers are selected from the highest echelons of military achievement. They do not produce weaklings who hide behind false legacies." Leo's cheek burned, but it was nothing compared to the heat of humiliation rising in his chest. He straightened, eyes forward, refusing to acknowledge the blow or the tears threatening to form. "The next time you feel the need to invent stories about your lineage," Zornak continued, addressing the entire class now, "remember that I have trained actual warriors. I know the truth of combat excellence." He pointed to the door. 10-minute break. When you return, I expect focus and honesty from all of you." The cadets filed out, giving Leo a wide berth as if his shame might be contagious. No one met his eyes. No one offered a word of support. In the harsh meritocracy of Nexus Prime, weakness, even perceived weakness, was isolation. Leo was the last to leave the training floor. His steps measured and controlled, despite the trembling in his limbs. Only when he reached the relative privacy of the corridor did he allow his hand to touch his face, fingers gently exploring the tender skin where Zornak's hand had connected. "You okay, kid?" The question came from Mira, one of the few senior cadets who occasionally acknowledged the younger trainees. Her expression held curiosity rather than sympathy. "Fine," Leo responded automatically, dropping his hand. Mira studied him for a moment. "Word of advice. Don't mention family around Zornak. He's got some complex about dynasties." She shrugged. "Makes for a bad training session for everyone." Leo nodded, not trusting himself to speak further. He moved toward the washroom, needing a moment alone before facing the class again. As he splashed cold water on his face, he examined his reflection in the mirror. A red mark was already forming high on his cheekbone, promising to darken into a bruise by evening. What would his grandfather say if he could see him now? The thought brought a fresh wave of shame. Marcus had raised him since his parents' transport ship was lost in an asteroid field accident when Leo was just 5. The old man never spoke much about his past. But Leo had grown up with stories from others about Marcus Valerian's legendary career as a combat instructor. Now he'd invoked that legacy and been publicly humiliated for it. The remaining minutes of break passed too quickly. Leo rejoined the class, keeping his eyes down as Zornak resumed the training session with increased intensity. The alien trainer seemed energized by the earlier confrontation, pushing the cadets through increasingly difficult combat scenarios. "Speed and precision," he shouted as holographic opponents materialized around the room. "Your enemy won't wait for you to find your proper foundation." Leo felt the barb intended for him, but refused to react. Instead, he channeled his humiliation into focus, moving through the combat sequences with mechanical precision. If not for the lingering sting on his cheek, he might have convinced himself the earlier incident had never happened. By the time the training session ended 2 hours later, every cadet was drenched in sweat and sporting minor injuries from the intensity of Zornak's drills. Leo gathered his belongings quickly, avoiding eye contact with his classmates, who had begun to whisper among themselves the moment Zornak left the training floor. Lying about his grandfather. Got what he deserved, always trying to stand out. The fragments of conversation followed him out of the training center and through the bustling corridors of Nexus Prime. The space station housed over 30,000 residents from dozens of species, most connected in some way to the military or trade operations that made the station a vital hub in this sector of space. Despite the crowds, Leo had never felt more alone than he did walking the familiar path to the residential section where he and his grandfather shared modest quarters. Their apartment was located in the lower levels, where the station's mechanics, maintenance crews, and service personnel lived. It wasn't prestigious, but it was home, a small 2-bedroom unit with a common area that Marcus had filled with plants from various worlds, creating a living space that felt more organic than the sterile station corridors. "I'm back," Leo called out as the door slid shut behind him. Marcus Valerian looked up from the small workbench where he was repairing what appeared to be a ventilation component. At 68, he remained solidly built, with broad shoulders and strong hands that showed the calluses of manual labor. His once dark hair had turned silver, and lines carved deep paths around his eyes and mouth, some from laughter, others from experiences he never discussed. "Early today," Marcus observed, setting down his tools. His gaze sharpened as he took in Leo's appearance. What happened to your face? Leo hesitated, suddenly uncertain about sharing the day's events. His grandfather worked as a station mechanic, maintaining the complex systems that kept Nexus Prime functioning. The work was respectable, but far removed from the combat training legacy Leo had invoked earlier. Had those stories been exaggerations, misunderstandings, outright fabrications? Training got intense. Leo finally answered. Moving toward the kitchen unit to get a cold compress, Marcus rose from his workbench, crossing the room with the fluid grace that sometimes caught Leo by surprise. Moments when his grandfather moved like someone far younger and with different training than a station mechanic should possess. "That's not from training," Marcus said quietly, gently turning Leo's face to examine the mark. "That's a deliberate strike." His voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Who hit you?" The direct question broke through Leo's resolve to handle this himself. "Trainer Zornak. I mentioned that you trained the Emperor's Guard, and he said I was lying." The words tumbled out in a rush. He said the Guard trainers wouldn't produce weaklings who hide behind false legacies. Marcus's expression didn't change, but a stillness came over him that Leo recognized as suppressed anger. Without a word, his grandfather walked to his bedroom and returned moments later with a small metal box. He placed it on the table between them and opened it with practiced movements. Inside, nestled in protective foam, lay a medallion unlike anything Leo had seen before. It gleamed with an inner light that seemed to pulse in time with the room's ambient illumination. Active tech rather than mere decorative metal. The design was intricate. A spiral galaxy surrounding a stylized sword, with symbols etched along the perimeter in a language Leo didn't recognize. "The Imperial Guard trainer's insignia," Marcus said simply. "Given to me by Emperor Talasian himself after the Orion campaign." Leo stared at the medallion, then at his grandfather. "But you're a mechanic." A ghost of a smile touched Marcus's lips. "I am now, yes. Why didn't you ever show me this before? Why do you let everyone think you're just a—" Leo stopped, immediately regretting his words. "Just a mechanic." Marcus finished for him, no offense in his tone. "Because that's who I am now, and it's honest work that keeps this station functioning." He closed the box with a soft click. "But tomorrow, we're going to visit your training center." Leo's stomach dropped. "Grandfather, you don't have to." "I do." Marcus interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "Not because your trainer struck you, though that's reason enough, but because you invoked my past with pride, and I won't let anyone punish you for speaking truth." The next morning found Leo more nervous than he'd ever been before a training session. Marcus walked beside him through the station corridors, dressed not in his usual mechanic's coveralls, but in a simple gray tunic and pants that somehow made him look more imposing rather than less. The medallion hung from a chain around his neck, partially concealed but visible enough to catch the light occasionally. As they approached the training center, Leo noticed his grandfather assessing the surroundings with quick, experienced glances, noting exits, scanning the security measures, observing the flow of people with an attention to detail that seemed automatic. "You don't have to come inside." Leo offered one last time as they reached the entrance. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "I do," he said simply. "But I won't interfere with your training unless necessary. This is still your journey." The training room fell silent as they entered. The other cadets were already assembled, going through preliminary stretches under Zornak's watchful eye. The alien trainer turned at the interruption, irritation clear in his posture until he registered Marcus's presence. "Civilians are not permitted during training sessions," Zornak stated. moving toward them with measured steps. "Security will escort you out." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he surveyed the training room with the critical eye of someone evaluating a familiar environment. The impact absorption on these mats is inadequate for high-velocity takedowns. He observed conversationally. "And your holographic targets are calibrated for Keldorian physiology, which explains why the human cadets are consistently missing the critical strike zones." Zornak blinked, momentarily thrown by the unexpected assessment. His gaze dropped to the partially visible medallion at Marcus's throat, then back to his face. Something like uncertainty flickered across his features. "You're the grandfather," he stated rather than asked. "Marcus Valerian." He confirmed with a slight nod. "I won't disrupt your session. I'm merely here to observe my grandson's training." A tense silence followed as Zornak visibly calculated his options. The other cadets watched with undisguised interest, sensing the power dynamics shifting in ways they didn't fully understand. "Very well." Zornak finally conceded, though his tone suggested this was far from over. "You may observe from the viewing area." He pointed to a raised platform at the far end of the room. "Thank you." Marcus replied with perfect courtesy, giving Leo's shoulder a reassuring squeeze before moving to the designated area. The training session began, and Leo found himself hyper-aware of both his grandfather's presence and Zornak's increased scrutiny. The alien trainer was pushing them harder than usual, calling out imperfections with cutting precision. "Cadet 437, Zornak barked after Leo completed a defensive sequence. "Your weight distribution is compromising your stability. Correct it." Leo adjusted his stance, drawing on the fundamentals his grandfather had shown him years ago. Lessons he'd assumed were just a grandfather's games rather than professional training. From the corner of his eye, he saw Marcus nod slightly in approval. As the session progressed, Leo found himself moving with increased confidence. The techniques that had always felt awkward under Zornak's instruction suddenly aligned with his body's natural mechanics when he approached them as his grandfather had taught him. His strikes became more precise, his defensive maneuvers more efficient. Other cadets noticed the improvement, shooting him curious glances during the brief transitions between drills. Even Zornak seemed caught between annoyance at Leo's sudden competence and professional appreciation for the improved form. During the mid-session break, Zornak approached the viewing area where Marcus sat observing quietly. "Your grandson shows marginal improvement today," the alien trainer stated, his voice carrying across the now empty training floor. "Though his progress has been consistently below standard until now." Marcus rose to his feet with unhurried grace. "Different teaching methods reach different students," he replied. "Leo has always responded better to foundational mechanics before application, a luxury not afforded in combat situations." Zornak countered. "True," Marcus acknowledged. "But without proper foundation, advanced techniques become dangerous to the student and eventually to those they're meant to protect." The subtle critique hung in the air between them. Zornak's scaled skin darkened slightly around the neck, a physiological tell of his species when agitated. "You question my methods?" he demanded, loud enough for the returning cadets to hear. Marcus shook his head. "I'm observing my grandson's training, as agreed. Perhaps you'd prefer to demonstrate these foundational mechanics yourself," Zornak suggested, a challenge evident in his tone. "If you truly trained the Emperor's Guard, surely a simple demonstration would be no difficulty." The room went completely still. Cadets froze in the doorway, unwilling to miss whatever was about to unfold. Leo felt his pulse quicken with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Marcus considered the challenge for a long moment before descending from the viewing platform. A demonstration, he agreed calmly. For educational purposes. Zornok's mouth stretched into that unsettling, not quite smile. Educational indeed. He gestured to the center of the training mats. Shall we? The cadets pressed themselves against the walls, creating a wide space for the two men. Leo found himself holding his breath as his grandfather, the quiet mechanic who fixed ventilation systems and grew exotic plants in their apartment, stepped onto the combat floor to face a professional military trainer. Marcus removed the medallion from around his neck and handed it to Leo. Hold this for me, he said softly, then stepped forward to face Zornak. The alien trainer immediately took an aggressive stance, his four-fingered hands raised in the distinctive combat position of his species. Attack or defend, your choice, mechanic, he said. The title clearly meant as an insult. I'll defend, Marcus replied. His posture relaxed, but balanced in a way Leo suddenly recognized from his earliest memories. The stance his grandfather had always naturally assumed. Zornak didn't waste time. He launched forward with impressive speed. His first strike aimed at Marcus's solar plexus, a testing blow to assess reaction time. Marcus sidestepped with such fluid efficiency that it appeared he'd barely moved at all. The attack missed by millimeters. Zornak immediately followed with a combination of strikes targeted at vulnerable human anatomy, each movement precise and calculated to disable, not one connected. Marcus moved like water around the attacks, his defensive patterns so seamlessly integrated that they appeared almost casual. He made no counterattacks, simply neutralizing each of Zornok's increasingly frustrated offensive maneuvers. Fight back, Zornak demanded, after a particularly complex sequence failed to land. That wasn't our agreement, Marcus replied calmly, not even breathing hard despite the intensity of the exchange. You asked for a demonstration of foundational mechanics. Defense is the foundation of all combat training. Something dangerous flashed in Zornok's eyes. His next attack abandoned technique for raw power, a sweeping kick meant to take Marcus's legs from under him. It was the kind of move that would have injured a cadet severely. And Leo found himself moving forward instinctively before a hand on his arm stopped him. Watch, Mira murmured beside him. This is history happening. Marcus didn't avoid the kick. Instead, he subtly shifted his weight, absorbed the impact along his shin, and used the connection point to disrupt Zornak's balance. The alien trainer stumbled, momentarily vulnerable. In that fraction of a second, Marcus moved. It wasn't a strike or a throw, nothing so dramatic. Instead, his hands found specific pressure points along Zornok's arm and shoulder. Applying a simple joint lock that used the alien's own momentum against him, the movement was so swift and precise that many of the watching cadets missed it entirely. One moment, Zornak was regaining his balance. The next, he was immobilized in a kneeling position, his arms secured behind him at an angle that promised significant pain if he struggled. This, Marcus said to the silent room, his voice carrying easily despite its conversational tone, is a universal restraint technique taught to the Emperor's Guard. It works on 17 different species with similar joint structures. He released Zornak and stepped back. It requires minimal strength, but perfect positioning, the foundation I mentioned. Zornak rose slowly, rubbing his shoulder where the joint lock had been applied. His expression was unreadable, but the dark coloration had spread from his neck to his face, a sign of intense emotion in his species. A lucky counter. He snarled, but there was uncertainty in his voice. One of the cadets, a tall Andronian with the distinctive markings of a wealthy family, had his communication device out, the recording light active. He wasn't the only one. At least 5 other cadets were documenting the encounter. And Leo realized with sudden clarity that this moment would spread far beyond the training room. "I believe the demonstration is complete," Marcus stated, turning to walk back to Leo. "Thank you for the opportunity." "We're not finished." Zornak lunged forward, abandoning all pretense of a training exercise. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, when reviewing the recordings, analysts would need to slow the footage to half speed to fully appreciate the sequence. Marcus pivoted on his back foot, ducked under Zornak's wild swing, and executed a textbook takedown that ended with the alien trainer flat on his back. The wind knocked from his lungs. Marcus straightened and looked down at the gasping trainer. "Now we're finished." A cheer erupted from the cadets before they could stop themselves. Zornak struggled to his feet, his authority visibly crumbling as the reality of what had just occurred settled over the room. He began, but was interrupted by the arrival of security personnel at the training room doors. "What's happening here?" demanded the lead officer, a stern-faced human woman with captain's insignia. "We received multiple emergency alerts. A training demonstration that got out of hand," Marcus explained smoothly. "Nothing more." The security captain looked skeptical, especially as she took in the expressions of the cadets and Zornak's disheveled appearance. "Trainer Zornak? Your explanation?" Before the alien could respond, the Andronian cadet stepped forward, communication device extended. "Captain, I have footage of the entire incident. Trainer Zornak struck a cadet yesterday and challenged this civilian to a combat demonstration today. Other cadets murmured agreement, several offering their own recordings as evidence." The security captain's expression hardened as she reviewed the footage briefly. "Trainer Zornak, you'll accompany me to the security office immediately," she ordered. Physical punishment of cadets violates station regulations and Interplanetary Combat Alliance guidelines. "This is absurd," Zornak protested. "I am a certified combat instructor with clearance from—" "From whom exactly?" came a new voice from the doorway. All heads turned to see an elegantly dressed Tressian woman enter, flanked by 2 officers wearing the distinctive insignia of the Interplanetary Combat Alliance Oversight Division. The Tressian's 6-fingered hands were clasped before her, and her posture radiated authority. "Investigator Nareen." The security captain acknowledged with a respectful nod. "I wasn't aware the ICA had representatives on station. We arrived this morning." Investigator Nareen replied, her multifaceted eyes scanning the room before settling on Marcus with a flicker of recognition. "Master Valerian. It's been many years." Marcus inclined his head. "Investigator, I'm surprised you remember me. The Emperor's Guard trainer who retired to become a station mechanic. You made quite an impression at headquarters." She turned her attention to Zornak. "We've received concerning reports about this training center. Illegal entry fees, falsified credentials, unauthorized physical discipline." She gestured to one of her officers, who produced a data tablet. "We were coming to investigate, but it seems we've arrived in the middle of a demonstration." The room erupted into barely controlled chaos. Cadets began speaking over one another, many coming forward with stories of Zornak's training methods, the excessive physical punishment, the extortionate special training fees, the culture of fear he had cultivated. The recordings of the confrontation between Marcus and Zornak spread through the station's communication network with the viral speed of sensational content. Within hours, Nexus Prime was buzzing with the news. The once prestigious training center was placed under investigation, with Zornak suspended pending review of his credentials and methods. For Leo, the aftermath was both vindicating and overwhelming. Classmates who had previously ignored or mocked him now approached with newfound respect, asking questions about his grandfather and offering belated support. "Did you know?" Mira asked him the following day as they sat in the station's central atrium. "About your grandfather's real background?" Leo fingered the fading bruise on his cheek thoughtfully. "I knew the stories. I just never saw the evidence until now." 2 weeks after the incident, the Interplanetary Combat Alliance officially revoked Zornak's training certification. The investigation revealed he had been operating with falsified credentials for years, building a reputation through intimidation rather than legitimate skill. The training center was temporarily closed, leaving dozens of cadets without instruction. It was Marcus who proposed the solution. "The hydroponics garden in the lower residential section has enough open space," he told Leo one evening. "With some minor modifications, it could serve as a training area." Leo looked up from his studies. "You want to turn the garden into a training center?" Marcus smiled. "Not the entire garden, just the eastern section near the artificial waterfall. The ambient sound aids concentration, and the varied terrain offers practical challenges." He paused, watching Leo's reaction. "That is, if you think the other cadets would be interested in training with a retired mechanic." The first session in the hydroponics garden drew 15 former cadets from Zornak's program. They arrived uncertain what to expect, finding Marcus waiting in simple exercise clothes, surrounded by the lush vegetation that thrived under his care. "This isn't a traditional training environment," he began, gesturing to the plants around them. "But combat rarely happens in convenient locations. Today, we start with foundations, not just of fighting techniques, but of understanding why we train at all." The difference in teaching approach was immediately apparent. Where Zornak had demanded blind obedience and punished failure, Marcus encouraged questions and treated mistakes as learning opportunities. He demonstrated each technique personally, explaining the underlying principles and adapting his instruction to each cadet's physical capabilities. Leo, who had always struggled with the aggressive pace of Zornak's training, found himself thriving under his grandfather's methodical approach. The forms that had once felt awkward now flowed naturally, each movement building logically on the last. Balance before power. Marcus often reminded them. Precision before speed. These are the foundations that will keep you alive when theory meets reality. Word spread through the station. By the end of the first month, the informal training group had doubled in size, with cadets from other programs requesting permission to join. The hydroponics garden training sessions became known for their practical effectiveness and respectful atmosphere, a stark contrast to the fear-based methods that had dominated station training culture. Investigator Noreen visited occasionally, observing from the sidelines with quiet approval. After one particularly effective session focusing on adaptive defense techniques, she approached Marcus. "The Alliance has reviewed your file, Master Valerian," she informed him. "They've authorized me to offer you an official training certification if you're interested in formalizing this program." Marcus considered the offer, watching as Leo helped a younger cadet perfect a defensive stance. Would that require returning to official facilities? Noreen followed his gaze to the thriving garden where cadets practiced among flowering plants and flowing water. "No," she decided. "I believe this environment is producing results that our sterile training centers could learn from." The official recognition brought structural improvements to the hydroponics garden training area. Better mats, advanced holographic systems, even dedicated changing facilities. Yet Marcus insisted on maintaining the integration with the garden itself. preserving the unique atmosphere that had become central to his teaching philosophy. Combat is part of life, he explained to his students. It should be learned in living spaces, not isolated chambers that disconnect it from the world we're training to protect. 6 months after Zornak's suspension, Leo stood beside his grandfather as a new group of cadets gathered for their first training session. The hydroponics garden had been expanded, with Marcus's plants thriving alongside the training area in a harmonious blend of growth and discipline. "You've built something remarkable here," Leo observed, watching the excited new arrivals. Marcus smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "We built it together," he corrected, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small object and placed it in Leo's palm, a replica of his own Imperial Guard medallion, sized for a younger man. "This isn't the official one," Marcus clarified. "That remains with me as part of my service record. But this carries the same meaning, a symbol of responsibility, discipline, and the courage to stand for what's right, even when standing alone." Leo closed his fingers around the medallion, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. "I didn't stand alone," he said quietly. "You were there." "I wasn't there when Zornak struck you," Marcus reminded him, "but you maintained your dignity and your truth. That's the foundation of everything we train for here." He squeezed Leo's shoulder. "Now, shall we begin today's session?" As they moved to greet the new cadets, Leo noticed Mira watching him from beside the artificial waterfall. She nodded toward the medallion in his hand with a questioning eyebrow. "Family legacy?" she asked when he approached. Leo considered the question, thinking of the journey from that humiliating slap to this moment, from shame to purpose, from isolation to community. "No," he finally answered, slipping the medallion around his neck. "Just a reminder that foundations matter." Mira smiled. "In that case, Cadet Valerian, I think you're on solid ground." Together, they joined the gathering circle of students, where Marcus waited to begin another day of training among the living plants of their unlikely combat garden, a place where strength grew not from fear or force, but from respect, truth, and the simple courage to stand up again after being knocked down. The former training center remained closed, its sterile walls and harsh lighting a monument to an approach that had failed. In its place, a new tradition flourished in the unlikely setting of a hydroponics garden, where cadets learned that the strongest warriors were not those who struck the hardest, but those who understood why they fought at all. And in the years that followed, when visitors to Nexus Prime asked about the unusual training facility where plants grew alongside warriors, they were told the story of a slap that changed everything. Not because of the pain it caused, but because of the truth it ultimately revealed. That true strength begins with the courage to speak honestly, even when your voice shakes, and the wisdom to build foundations that can weather any storm. For Leo, that lesson, more than any combat technique, was the true legacy his grandfather had passed down to him. Not the glory of having trained the Emperor's Guard, but the quiet integrity that had guided Marcus from the heights of military prestige to the honest work of a station mechanic. And finally, to this garden, where both plants and people thrived under his care. It was a legacy worth claiming, not for the status it conferred, but for the responsibility it represented. A responsibility Leo now embraced as he helped a new generation of cadets find their own foundations in the garden his grandfather had built. The medallion around his neck caught the light as he demonstrated a basic stance to a young Tressian cadet struggling with balance. It wasn't just a symbol of past glory, but a promise of future growth. Growth that, like the plants surrounding them, required patience, attention, and the courage to reach toward the light even after knowing darkness. Foundation first, Leo reminded the cadet, adjusting their posture with gentle hands. Everything else follows. In the corner of the garden, Marcus watched with quiet pride as his grandson became the teacher, passing on not just techniques, but principles, the true foundation of any lasting legacy. And on Nexus Prime Space Station, amid the stars and the void of space, a garden of warriors continued to grow, rooted in respect, branching toward excellence, and flowering with the quiet strength that comes not from domination, but from understanding the true purpose of power: to protect, to nurture, and to build a future worth fighting for.